Good afternoon, everybody. This is our first panel meeting of the day, so welcome. Our panel comprises Bob Cumberbatch, I think our only technically English person today, or West Indies spoke English. We have Tessa Keough in America. We've got Paul Howes, was English. Now, are you American or not? Florida, and we've got Jim Benedict from Calgary, Canada. I'm just going to panel on just a moment so that I can get everything, all the magic working. Because if it works, it's going to be wonderful. All right.
I don't think so.
Right, the panel is going to be talking about the software that they use for their one-name studies and how it supports collaboration, communication, and cooperation. Okay, how are we doing? Talk amongst yourselves.
All right. Is that correct now?
I'm afraid I have to switch to in the room.
Okay.
But,
all right.
Well, we're getting a bit of echo in here, and I apologise for that. I can't avoid it so that you can hear Tessa and Tessa can hear you. Welcome to the panelists. Thank you for covering for me whilst we did that little bit of stuff. What I'd like to do now is to quickly hand over to the panelists and ask them to quickly introduce themselves and their one-name studies. Perhaps first we can start with you, Tessa.
Okay, great. And I think that you're seeing the screen that I first gave. Basically, I joined the Guild for collaboration, cooperation, and communication, although I didn't really know it at the time. I was looking for others who were doing their surname research and conducting one-name studies who could help me. And I've kind of showed you a number of the ways by sharing how you all work on your studies, by telling me the mistakes you made so I didn't need to make them, by explaining the software you use, by providing me with online and offline resources, by listening to me explain a problem and making suggestions so I could solve it, and by publishing your blogs, your websites, any of your spreadsheets, the articles that you've turned over to the journal, so that I and others could learn for them. And I just wanted to mention that my first experience with Guild members came from meeting them in what was at the time the brand new Google Plus Hangout technique. And Bob Cumberbatch was testing it out during a conference a few years back, and I think they were all sitting in a pub with a Hangout on Air invitation popped up on the computer. And so that's the moment that I communicated for the first time with the Guild on a personal level. I met other Guild members face to face, and it was the reason I renewed my membership that year and the reason that I renew it every year. And I think that our best hope for collaboration, cooperation, and communication comes from fellow Guild members, because you all have a wealth of experience and you're willing to share it with the rest of us. Now, if you switch to the map that's there, Bob, my Keough one-name study started in Plate Cove, East Newfoundland, where my grandfather was born and raised. And 5 years into my one-name study, I've collected the church and the civil registration data, as well as census data, for most of the Keoughs in Newfoundland. I continue to gather data and reconstruct Keough families located in Newfoundland, and at this point, that remains the main focus of my research and analysis. However, in an effort to expand the scope of my one-name study, as well as to encourage collaboration and cooperation with Keoughs from all over the world, I've also gathered civil registration data from England and Wales, as well as census data from Canada, Ireland, Scotland, and the United States. And part of the reason is that this data is so easily obtained today, and with spreadsheets you can easily manipulate it. In my opinion, it's imperative that when someone contacts me about my Keough One Name study, that I can either answer their question, guide them in the right direction to find the answers on their own, or encourage them to share their data with me in order to grow their bigger tree and a larger database. If I were to tell them that I was not familiar with, nor was I intending to research in major areas where the Keough surname exists, I don't see how I could say that I conduct a global one-name study or that I aspire to be a leading researcher in the Keough surname. Next slide. My profile on the Guild website is my website or landing page where anyone Googling my surname is directed. And I really think that every member of the Guild, since we have the ability to have a profile page, we should take advantage of this benefit to either publish it or update it for our profile. The next slide. Whether you use Google or any of the other popular search engines, have you done a search using your surname, one name study, or genealogy or family history as search terms? What do those searches bring back? This is my Google search result. I want to be the result when anyone searches for the Keough surname or Keough genealogy or Keough surname research. So if you want to be found online, you have to put yourself out there. Others have to be able to find you before they can contact you. And finally, the next slide, my blog, the Keough Corner, is where I post about, among other things, my research and my Keough One Name study. So I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
Excellent. Thank you, Tessa. If you put yourself on mute, I think that might cure the echoing at this end.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Jim. Paul. Yes. Which one of you is first? Paul, would you like to give us a slide? You have my slides. The pictures? Yeah. And just one slide. Okay, well, brief introduction to my study. Hopefully there's a bunch of pictures coming up. These are all sort of examples of things that I've gathered from my one-name study. Okay, all right, well, I'll just talk then. Almost all the data in our database has been entered by hand by three of us who work collaboratively together. I started a one-name study 7 years ago. Today we have 96,500 people in reconstructed family trees on our website with about 750,000 facts for those people. We have a variety of people from around the world working together, so there's me in Florida, my cousin Ian in Sutton in Surrey, a guy called Mike Howes who lives in Cheshire. We have a gentleman in Spain whose mother was a Howes who manages all the 2,000 images on our website. We had a gentleman called Dave Howes in Germany who did all our original index construction. So just to give you a sense for how far we've got, between 1837 and 1950, there were about 24,000 marriages for people named Howes in England and Wales, and that's our master checklist. Of those 24,000, we know the parties in the marriage for about 15,000, and of that 15,000, we actually know the location where people got married of about 6,000. And a good chunk of that is thanks to the wonderful people who do marriage challenges. So really appreciative of that. The internet, without the internet, my one-name study would have been impossible, and our website is out there. And just like Tessa, if you search for Howes, one-name study or genealogy, or you do a search for even William Howes, the most frequent name that we have about 2,000 of them, you'll find us on page 1 and usually towards the top of almost any Google search that you care to do.
can't remember what else I need to say, but I've probably used up my time. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Jim, quick introduction to your study, please.
My introduction will be very brief because I can't compete with the other two presenters. Incredible research that they have done. I'm very fortunate. I have two family lines I'm doing, my mother's and my father's. My father's was one name study. And I have two hardcover, thoroughly researched volumes on the Benedicts in America. I have no research to do. On my mother's side, my aunt prepared a book on the family, the Weber family, and she did all the research on that side as well. So, my work is done. Until I started opening up the pages and comparing the sources. Errors, mistakes, transposed information. Now it becomes a detective story, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'll be sharing some information with you a little later on as to some of the tools that I have used, but digging up those relatives is turning out to be quite a fantastic hobby. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So question one for the panelists. We did some rehearsing and pre-arranged some questions to get the conversation going. So if you have any questions, I will have to fiddle around with the technical stuff to get you heard. But please do interrupt. First question, Tessa, this is for you. What software or techniques do you use, and how do they support collaboration, communication, and cooperation? Over to you, Tessa.
Okay, great. If you could put it through 2, that will take you to where I have the first question on the slide. Does that help you? Or yeah, one more? Perfect. Okay. I just wanted one back. Perfect. Okay. I just wanted to show all of the different types of things that I use, but I'm only going to talk about a few of them. I did lots of research before I decided on the software program that I was going to use for my genealogy database, and I happen to use Legacy Family Tree. I use it for my personal history as well as my one-name study, simply because I prefer to control my data, so I don't put my tree directly online, and I like to work with it on my computer rather than in the cloud. I prefer a genealogy management program that allows me to download data in both Excel and Access formats because I'm very familiar with them and I can manipulate them better. And of course, you need a program that supports and reads GEDCOM. I think most of the genealogy database software programs have the same features, and so it basically comes down to a personal decision based on which program is intuitive, fits your needs, is fully supported, and is updated regularly to address changes. So that's the only comment that I'd have about that. I happen to use Historian software by Panstoria to organize, edit, and share my digital photos, images, video clips, and audio files. I do this for both my personal genealogy and my one-name study, as well as my individual family photos, and we have about 15,000 of them. And so all of this information, all of my documents and all of my images are maintained in that software. And the reason that I use it is I find it easier than Photoshop, and it provides a real simple method to add metadata that makes organization and sharing a breeze for us. I do use note-taking programs. I use OneNote and Evernote, and those are both note-taking programs. OneNote is my long-term extensive research set of notebooks. However, I do use Evernote because I find their clipping service to be better at the various websites, and so when I'm researching online, I put the information into Evernote. I like it because I'm easily able to share from my research notebook, whether that's a file that I send to someone or I allow them access to the notebooks, and then we can interact together and collaborate, and we don't have to worry about emails or various versions of what we're working with. I'm a big fan of Microsoft products, and I know some people don't like them, but I use most of them except for Outlook, and I use them for work as well as in the personal environment. I've done it for years, and I use Office 365, so it's available on my laptop as well as in the cloud. I also like the Google products, and I use Google Drive for a lot of things. I think that it's not as robust yet as the Office products, but it's probably getting there. I use Blogger by Google for my blog, The Keough Corner, and it's not really limited to my one-name study, but it's also about my entire family history, the information I'm putting out there online, as well as any of my genealogy adventures. I'm working on a website right now, but it's private, and I'm using Weebly for that. And so each of the programs and then the apps that I've shown you with those Wordles, I have a two-part test for that. And the first part of the test is it needs to be easy to use, because although I'm willing to learn programs, I don't want a really steep or an insurmountable learning curve. And second, they can't be proprietary in nature. Some of the programs are so closed that you're unable to import or export your data easily. So I won't use a program and go all in with it if I don't think it can be read or used by other programs. And the reason for that two-part test is because I just prefer to do my research and gather and analyze data and share it with people rather than tinker or play with software and apps. I think I'm probably a B- person as far as software and being techie goes. And so at this point I focus on my research, and I contact others who share my surname, so I'm using social media for that. But other than that, I kind of stick to the web, to the apps and the software that I've shown you there.
Thank you. Excellent. Let me just turn this down. Jim, next question is for you. Question 1. Jim, what software or techniques do you use, and how do they support collaboration, communication, and cooperation?
And I think you have 5 slides for me that I sent through. No? I use hand signals. All right. Oh, you have the pictures? That was one of them. Back up, back up. Is that it? All right. I'll work through that. Okay. Thank you, Bob. So, I have a massive problem on my hands. I have the original author of one of the volumes on the genealogy of the Benedicts in America. He passed away a few years ago. His wife is still alive. And they have amassed a pile of original documents on the Benedicts. When I say amassed a pile of, we figured if they stack all the papers on top of each other, it will be about 3 stories high. All right? And these are documents, pieces of paper, family trees, and photographs and books that have been submitted by Benedicts all around North America in hopes that Volume 3 will get published. So I have far too much information. I have an opposite problem to most of you here in this room. So what I need is tools that will allow me to organize that information so I can lay my hands on it. And one of the tools I need is a document manager tool. The other thing, I'm very, very fortunate in that my son, who is very involved in IT and website development, is helping Dad hobble through all the jungles of setting up websites and the like. So I'm very fortunate that way, and he has set up a media manager site for me for what will amount to tens of thousands of pieces of paper that have to be cross-indexed. I'm going to have a bunch of volunteers to help as well. That's one tool that I need. The next tool, which is shown in the upper right, is a wiki. We've been running this wiki now for about 8 years. And this wiki looks like a book, and that's intentional. It is a family book that is a wiki that has all of the Benedicts in it, plus other surnames, birth, marriage, death, dates, locations, but it also houses stories. You're able to type in full stories on the family, information you have, where they live, where they work, and so on, and it adds flesh to the bones. And it's called genealowiki.com that we manage. In that website, we have Nathan Benedict, and the Reverend Nathan Benedict. We're coming up to another slide shortly. I don't think we have that on site, Bob. Nope, back up, please. I'll explain that later. Nathan Benedict is a Benedict of about 1850s in Connecticut, and I got a very surprising connection to them, only because of the wiki site, and I'll explain that shortly. On the upper left is a Facebook site. That's the Facebook page. You can just make out, it says, Who's That Sitting in My Family Tree, which is the title of the book that my Aunt Gert prepared on my mother's side of the family. And I'm using Facebook and this site to stay in touch with all of my living cousins, nieces, and nephews, and the like. You can see on the bottom, you can just make it out, that's Aunt Toots and her son, that's Uncle Weir, my Uncle Weir in Navy uniform. And I'm posting old family photos, and I'm triggering the rest of the family to get engaged, to get interested. Who is this? How am I connected to that person? And so on. So I'm using Facebook as a way of getting in touch with my living relatives and having something relevant for them. That's question one for me.
Okay, question one for me around what software do I use? I used to use Family Tree Maker, but my database got to about 70,000 people, and it kept crashing my computer. And I found out the reason for it afterwards, and I'll explain why in a second. I now use Family Historian on the advice of several guild members, some of whom are in the room. You may remember a question I posed on the Guild's forum, and I got lots of answers, and after due consideration and trying it out, I switched to Family Historian. The real benefit of that is kind of twofold. One, it works in native text mode, so it actually operates on a GEDCOM file, and that has a number of advantages, one of which is that when you make a backup, you can compress it, you can zip it down, and the size of my compressed backup file is only 10 megabytes. My regular GED file is over now 3 million lines of code, and that's about 62 megabytes. And the Family Tree Maker file equivalent was 310 megabytes. And it's not difficult to see why, with frequent updates, the thing kept crashing my machine. So that's why I had to switch. Now that's what I use day to day. For web display, I use a program that Jim and others are very familiar with, and Bob too. It's called TNG, the Next Generation. Brilliant piece of software, only about $32, I think. But it provides a web front end and also a database engine and display engine for all the data in my file. To that, I've added a bulletin board software, which is free to use. So most of my stuff is either cheap or free. The bulletin board I kind of use as a blog, but I use it to send a monthly newsletter reporting on the research we've done that month, or interesting facts, or asking questions of people. So the particular thing I'm stuck on, I'll try and engage with the people who've registered on my website so as to get them more involved. And the basic reason for all of this, as far as I'm concerned, is that my study is so large, I realized very early on it was too big to do on my own. So I had to engage with other people and get them to share stuff with me. And more than that, I want them to feel like this is their site and not just my site. And I've succeeded to some degree. Let me give you an example. With TNG website, you can use that to send out emails direct to the people who register. So that's really easy. And then on the bulletin board, I can see how many people then read the monthly newsletter that I sent out with my email. I send them a link, and they click on the link. And the bulletin board software actually counts the number of people. So I have 1,020 people who registered on my website today. Generally, the average number of people who read my monthly newsletter is about 300. But I noticed during February that only 16 people had read January's email. So I thought, well, we'll see. I sent out February's and nothing happened. So I switched. I used some other free software online called MailChimp.com, and it's excellent. I sent out another monthly newsletter for February, and within 30 hours, that's 1 day and 6 hours, I had over 300 people read the monthly newsletter on the bulletin board. So that shows you not just the power of MailChimp in actually getting people's attention when you send the email out, but it also shows you the level of engagement of the people who've been registered on my site. As for other software that we use, I'm a scatterbrain. I had ADHD before we called it that. And so I'm not nearly as well organized as Tessa is. I do have a few master checklists and so on. I use LibreOffice as my working office suite. It's the equivalent to Microsoft Office, but it's free to use. And it's called LibreOffice, L-I-B-R-E, Office, all one word. And I do use Evernote for my little reminders to myself because I do forget stuff. And so I keep a checklist of things I'm working on and so on. And the facts I find during the month that might be interesting to subscribers, I keep a note to remind myself at the end of the month what to put in my newsletter.
Excellent. Thank you. Before moving off question one, which was all about software and techniques, one thing that came out during the preparation was the use of Facebook. And Tessa, if you'd like to relay to the audience how you use Facebook or how you have used Facebook in your study.
Sure. And that kind of went in a little bit to my to the second question. And so if you want to go to that slide just so they can see what it looks like while I'm talking about it, that would be great. You're having to do all this work. I apologize. I think it's, yeah, it's one more. Perfect. You went backwards. Okay. It's question 2, so you need to go one more. That's it. Okay. I will start out by saying that I have never seen the use of Facebook. I never liked it. I didn't use it. But back in 2009, I had an opportunity to go to Newfoundland on the spur of the moment. There was a seminar that I signed up for, and I decided to make a holiday out of it. And I was trying to figure out if there was anyone I could contact because we didn't know any of our extended relatives up there. And so my niece just in passing suggested that I go on Facebook and see if I could find any relatives or if anyone from Plate Cove was on there. And I thought she was crazy at the time, but I went ahead and signed up for an account and I went on. And so imagine my surprise when I found that Plate Cove, Newfoundland had a Facebook group. Now this is a fishing village with about 40 people who live there full-time now. At the height of its population, I want to say it was about 300, and that would have been back in the 1920s. But this Facebook group is for people who have any kind of connection to Plate Cove. Either they were born there, maybe their family's from there, maybe they have extended family like I do. And so I joined the Facebook group and I posted about my planned trip, which it was going to be in about a week, and the fact that I was looking for relatives. And within a week, I was in contact with about a dozen extended family members and other Keoughs. And Keough is one of the more popular names there. So I got information, names and phone numbers from various people to visit while I was in St. John. So those were the people that had left Plate Cove, as well as the few people who were in Plate Cove. And one person gave me the name and address of a woman who lived in Plate Cove. She wasn't on Facebook, and I don't even think they have internet access in Plate Cove. But she still lives there. And I met with her when I was in Plate Cove, and we spent the better part of 2 days together. Now, Geraldine is in her late 70s, and she'd done some of her family genealogy early on, and she shared that paperwork with me and some photos of when her family had visited in the United States. And when I asked her if I could take pictures of those pictures and record her, she suggested that I might be interested in the binders she kept. And I was kind of wondering what she was talking about, but she opened a closet, and she had probably 50 binders in there. And they were done by the year, and they contained newspaper articles and school pictures and community events and notes that she kept about anything that went on in the community and the 2 or 3 communities around there. And she also knew the church secretary for Plate Cove, and so I had an in when I wanted to go and look at records, and she introduced me to everyone in the community. She took me on a tour of the area, and I was able to record that, and she told me all about growing up in that region because she was born there, and all about everything that had happened in Plate Cove because that was the community that she married into. So the moral of my story is, no matter how much you hate social media, really get used to it, because you're going to find people online who can assist you, and they're going to know people who aren't online but who can provide you information. And all of those people I have found have photographs and documents that they're willing to share. Most of them can help you. Geraldine helped me with the census information from 1935 and 45. She was able to tell me about the families, and she was able to make corrections to my family reconstructions. So be willing to communicate with others, and if you're willing to share, you're going to gain their trust, and they'll collaborate with you on your one-name study.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tessa. Jim or Paul, is there anything you'd like to add to the Facebook collaboration, cooperation, communication, and particularly how you use it?
Yeah, sure. I think I have almost the opposite issue than Tessa does. Tessa's issue there was very focused. So when she contacted people through Facebook, she had a real defined purpose, and she got people's attention immediately with that. With the name Cumberbatch, for example, if Bob looks up people named Cumberbatch on Facebook and sends them a message, I guarantee you get a reply, right, most of the time. Because the issue here is that when you have an infrequent name, I nearly said uncommon, when you have an infrequent name, finding a fellow name holder is a real event. It makes somebody's day to get a Facebook message from somebody else called Cumberbatch. But somebody else called Howes, especially in Norfolk, forget it. People just aren't interested. And many people named Howes in Norfolk still aren't on Facebook anyway. But that's another story. So the way I've used Facebook is I've used it to find unusual people named Howes in unusual places. So I'll just give you one example. I'm friends on Facebook with a gentleman named Agustin Howes, who's in Argentina. And I just did a search for Howes on Facebook and just went down the list until I found a relatively unusual name, Agustin, especially with the accented I, made it obvious the guy was a Spanish speaker. And so I wrote to him. His English isn't very good, my Spanish is terrible, but with translate.google.com, it's pretty easy to communicate. It works very well. You take somebody's reply to you, you copy and paste the text into translate.google.com, and up pops a pretty good version of what the person's trying to say. And that's worked for me. So with some information that guy gave me, I then found a website. There's I forget the name of it now, but if you Google foreigners in Argentina or Anglos in Argentina, you'll find it. It has a lot of information with links to original parish registers for Anglo churches down there. And so I was able to build a bit of his family tree and add some stuff for Argentina into my database I wouldn't have otherwise got.
Well, I did touch on Facebook briefly myself. And I use Facebook mainly to stay in touch with my living cousins. We're organizing a big family reunion this August, and we'll have about 70, 80 turning out for it. But I also have Jeannie, and I appreciate Lawrence's information earlier. Jeannie is also one way to stay in touch with the family, but I also find with Jeannie, I can quickly find other Benedict names, and while there's not the detail of information, sources of information necessarily, it's the contact information and their relevance on the family tree. And from that I can talk to them and dig in a little deeper. And the other collaborative tool, once again, is the wiki. Don't discount wikis. Wikis become very enriched sources of information, and you get not just names and dates, but you also understand so-and-so was a captain in the fire department in Syracuse, and it really enriches the information.
Actually, one other thing I'd mention here, it's not something I've done, but while I was at Roots Tech, the big genealogy conference in Salt Lake City in March, beginning of March, and there was a presentation there from a lady who was planning a family reunion of all the descendants of a particular individual. And she did it almost entirely using Facebook. She made a Facebook page for her ancestor and then drew a few people's attention to it and asked them to get their relatives connected into that Facebook page. And the thing just built on itself. It's so much easier to use Facebook than keep a list of email addresses for all the descendants of this one person. With Facebook, you can hit them in one go, and they can communicate with each other. And it makes planning an event like a family reunion a lot easier.
Fantastic, thank you. Before moving off the end of question one of the topics that we discussed was, do you and should you charge for access to information that you provide, newsletter, website presence, whatever? Do you charge for access to your sites? Tessa will do the panel first here and then come to you.
Personally, no, I don't charge, basically because, as you can see, it doesn't cost a lot. I mean, the software, it cost me $30 for my web display software. It cost me $9 a year for the domain registration, and a minimum $5 a month for the web hosting. So it's pretty cheap. I do, however, ask for donations, and I've had over £100 donated in the last year, which I then use to buy more certificates to answer more questions that we have. But again, think about the reason why I started this study and how I did it the way I did. I want to have maximum visibility on the web, and consequently, nothing's behind a wall. Everything's in the shop window except for people who were born within 100 years ago. If I don't know they've died, you can't see them. But I need to have everything visible on the web, so Google will allow other people to find me.
And I think that was a consensus amongst the panelists, more or less. Anything you want to add, Jim?
I also, likewise, do not charge or expect payment for any of the services, but my wife, Joan, who's in the back there, will say that you have invested so much time of your life into this so-called hobby, Jim. If we ever added it up and converted it to dollars, but I imagine we all face that.
Tessa, anything you'd like to add?
I don't charge, and I don't think I ever would charge, and part of the reason is why I got into this one name study. But the other thing is, I think that if I were on the receiving end of this, if I were the person looking up the Keough information who just came onto one of these sites and someone was charging, I don't know that I'd be so willing to share information or to work with them. It's really helpful to be able to tell anyone who's new to me to go to the Guild website and take a look at my profile and see what I've done so far and see what the Guild does. And when the Guild says it's a charity and then your information is on the profile and then you're asking for information, I think we're taken a lot more seriously, and I don't think that that would work if we were charging.
To be honest. Question 2 was about any unusual artifact, piece of information, memorabilia that you've received that you wouldn't have received that you'd like to share with the group without cooperation, collaboration.
I'll kick this one in. You may remember I was talking about the Reverend Nathan Benedict earlier. This is a quilt. Ignore on the left. That's full of piles of paper. On the right, you'll notice there's a quilt hanging, in fact, behind those people. And on the left is Lisa Elander, myself, and my wife Joan in Calgary. I got contacted by Lisa by email saying that she was coming up to Calgary to meet with the local quilting society. She was bringing something with her. And she said, and I found information on a name on this quilt from your Genealowiki site. She was coming up all the way from Texas to Calgary with this in hand, and we were in Calgary. So we got invited to the Quilting Society meeting in a one-room schoolhouse that's now an historic building, and we got to meet the other quilters. Joan and I were the featured guests at this. Lisa was a featured talker. She had 4 quilts she brought with her, but this is her prize quilt. Lisa specializes in quilts that have names embroidered on them. You can't make it out, but the Reverend Nathan Benedict is on that top right panel on this thing. This quilt was a gift that was put together by Nathan's second wife, Margaret, to her stepdaughter, Emily Mears, was given to her somewhere around 1856 in Connecticut, and it's been handed down from generation to generation to generation to generation until it fell into the hands of Lisa. The experience of standing beside something that was put together by one of your ancestors 150 plus years ago and being able to touch it, I still get shivers when I think about it. It's an astounding experience. And that would not have happened without having done the wiki site, the social media, and so on. So it was quite an experience. And that, if that ever comes up for sale, Joan and I are on first dibs for it, I'll tell you.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't have anything quite as dramatic as that. I do have quite close relations with a group called the House Family Association in North America. And one of them monitors eBay for items relevant to their part of the House family. So they're all the descendants of a particular couple that arrived in North America in 1637. And they monitor eBay. They sent me an email one day saying there's 2 sets of medals for a pair of brothers named House on sale on eBay, and I bought them. And still haven't gotten around to it, but it's my ambition to make a suitable memorial for these 2 brothers. The wife finally died without issue. There was a house sale, and the guy from Sheffield, just cleared out the house and thought there'd be some money in these medals. So I ended up buying them and a whole bunch of memorabilia for this particular family because they had no other home to go to. Some of the other things that have come up in my one-name study, the top right there's a $1 coin from Australia, which is in commemoration of then Captain Sir Neville Howes, who was the first Australian winner of the Victoria Cross. And it turns out I already had a piece of memorabilia in my possession because my old hobby, before I started collecting ancestors, was collecting stamps. And Australia issued a commemorative stamp for Captain Howes some years ago, so I have that. And this other one's just the bottom right there is a reference to Seth Benedict House. That's his mausoleum in Westchester County, New York. I don't actually have anything for him yet, but it's my intention to get at least a picture of it. Small story, this guy was one of the very first transatlantic entrepreneurs. He had a circus, which he took from North America to London in 1855 or so. Stayed here for a few years, married an English girl, went back to the States, made a huge success out of this circus, and eventually he sold it to one P.T. Barnum. And he took the money that he made from that and invested in Chicago real estate and made an absolute fortune. With that money, he sponsored the first ever genealogy into the Howes family in North America in 1892. And I believe he did that for reasons of wanting to gain acceptance into high society in New York, because he wanted to find a connection to old money back in the old country. Because he was a bit of a roughneck, but he was an incredibly wealthy roughneck. When he died in 1902, depending on which newspaper you read, it either says he was worth $2 million or $20 million. Unfortunately, I was thinking of that as a source of funding for my DNA project, but unfortunately it's all been dissipated. Now, the point of this story is the lady who was from England donated a large silver salver encrusted with diamonds and other precious stones to the Archdiocese of York. So it's my business in the next few weeks to contact the Archdiocese and see if they still have it, in which case I want a picture of it. Oh, okay. Does anybody here know what an easy bake oven is? Okay, some do. Only 30 million sold. It is basically a small oven powered by a light bulb, and it was invented by Ronald Howes, who is a gentleman pictured there. Probably you're more familiar with a spirograph. Well, he invented that too, or at least he improved it a lot for commercial sale. So there's a picture of the spirograph and the Easy Bake Oven in the top right. Bottom left is probably, well, it certainly is a printing telegraph machine from 1852 that was designed and built by a gentleman named Royal Earl Howes. And I think without that machine, we may not have been here today, because if you think about it, he was converting dots and dashes for old Morse code into text. So you could say he was the forerunner of the ASCII code, which gave rise to the internet.
Thank you. Tessa, anything you'd like to add before we move on to question 3?
Nope, I'm good.
Fantastic. Okay, on to question 3 then. Tessa, you're up first. What benefits has your ONS enjoyed through communication, collaboration, and cooperation? Give me a minute to adjust the settings, Tessa. Okay, Tessa.
Are you good with that? Okay, and if you go to slide 9, hopefully that's the question 3 one. We'll see. You're getting your exercise this morning. Okay, perfect. I think the biggest benefit of these 3 C's from my one name study, I've benefited most from interacting with other guild members because every week I get at least one email with a link to either a website or a copy of an obituary or a newspaper article that a guild member has seen, and they've thought of me because of my one name study, and they're familiar with the surname Keough. And it's very easy to give them a quick thanks right when I get it, and then I make it a point to look for their surname in my local newspapers when I go out and do research. And I enjoy reading the journal and following along most of the time, not all the time, with the forum. Members are always suggesting technology and websites, and they also have research ideas, or they discuss their methodology. And all of those tips are really a huge assist to me. You know, sometimes I look at something and think, oh, that might be a better product than what I'm using now, or I can ask them questions because they use the same product that I do. And I really appreciate the efforts that some have made with their YouTube videos. I learned so much from Morris Gleason's YouTube videos on DNA. I never understood it before. And Debbie Kinnett's books were a huge help for me when I was first trying to figure out how to organize or what things to pay attention to with a one-name study. And I really want to thank any of those unsung members of the Guild who contribute to the Guild Wiki, because that's really helpful to me. I'm familiar with American records, but I had no clue as to Irish records or UK records, and so reading through the wiki and finding those links has been really helpful. And I would say that I learn as much from other Guild members' websites and blogs as I do from anything that I publish, and it really helps me make decisions about how to proceed with what I'm going to do for my website, and it really helps me when I'm taking a look at things to do for my one-name study.
Excellent, thank you. Right, Jim, over to you. How has your study benefited?
I really stand or sit in awe of Paul's work. I've seen his website and the incredible amount of research and material in it. I guess with my membership in the one name study, I have this terrible, terrible burden sitting on me now, stacked 3 stories high. And in order to meet my obligations of the guild, should be finished in about 40 years. So the good news is, Joan, I should make it to my 110th birthday when we wrap this thing up. I've really enjoyed the friendship and camaraderie in the guild, and the hangouts have been a glorious way to feel like we in North America are in touch with all the other members of the guild, and I think Paul and Tessa would share that feeling with me. But to realize that it's not just having family names in Family Tree Maker, that through the society there's an even higher aspiration I can make on this whole thing of really fleshing out one surname and doing all I can to bring it all together is certainly a great satisfaction. So that's a benefit back to me, despite the obligation.
And then finally, Paul, perhaps one of the biggest guild benefits are marriage challenges. Paul, how have you benefited?
Absolutely. While we were on the phone preparing for this presentation, I opened up Family Historian and counted the number of sources in my database that say Guild Marriage Challenge, and it was 9,703. And that's just sources of individual facts. So if I take a rough average of 9 facts per marriage certificate equivalent, that means I've had over 1,000 marriage details from other members of the guild. If you convert that back into money, it's 10,000 quid. It was quite staggering even to me when I found that, and I'm so grateful. This is absolutely impossible to do without the help of other guild members and other people around the world. And I make it my business to give back as often as I can. So all the guild indexes have submissions from the house study, and wherever I can, I'm going through obituaries for various newspapers and sending those out to other members to keep that collaboration going. Because to me, it's one of the most precious things about the guild is the amount of fellow feeling and collaboration there is among us. And the final thought is simply fun.
Right, thank you very much indeed. That's all the questions we had for these panelists. Do you have maybe 1, 2 questions to Tessa or to Paul? And Tessa, I've got you on the big screen, I'm afraid. Any questions of the panel? Any thoughts, comments? Just a minute. Oh, perfect. All right, Tessa, I hope you'll hear this.
Hello. I hope it's not a naive question, but I always understood that Google, when you put in the search term, it was dead clever and gave you kind of what you wanted. Like when I put in my one name study Rashley, the first thing it finds are all my websites and stuff like that. But if one of you put in Rashley, would it find it? Because it's tailored to find the things that you've put in. So I want to know that somebody else out there actually finds what I put up there.
Somebody got a smartphone, you could just try it.
Do you want me to try and answer that?
Yeah, what the question was that the searching, when you search, it might be different from someone else searching for the same concept. Yes, Google tries to find an appropriate match based on what you've looked on before. Debbie's pointed out that can be fixed or changed.
You can look at it as the public.
The local library. I'm not sure I caught that one.
You can do that, but also from your own computer. You can take a look at it from a public point of view, or you can close out your account.
Way that you go into Google, so if you're doing a search for British records, go into google.co.uk, you'll get a different list than you will if you use google.com. The order of the words in the search will give you different results if you put the same words in different order, because Google treats the first word as the most important and the second word as the second most important, and so on.
Tessa, is there something you wanted to add? All right, let me just put you on the speaker. Just a minute. Okay, go for that, Tessa.
Paul might have already mentioned this, but you can also go in as the public. You can close out, if you've gone in through your Google account and just go into it clean. You can also, what I do is just go to someone else's computer and take a look at it if I wanted to switch it out. And then go to different there so you can see what shows up, if you go to Bing or Dogpile or anything else.
Well, that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank the panelists and to Ken for welcoming us as a group. Thanks very much to Tessa. You'll be seeing Tessa immediately after lunch in this setup, so you'll be listening to her more than having a panel, so I won't be jumping around up here so much. So thank you all very much for your attention. Over to lunch.
Oh.
Could